What is going on, everybody? Me, your friendly neighborhood pastor, doing some reactions today, as well as opening up the lines for debate. If you want to come on up, let me know. Jesus is God, abortion is murder, Islam is demonic, and atheism is folly. If you believe any of those things, come get some. I'll be your huckleberry. For everybody else, thank you for joining me. I'm going to be reacting today to Inspiring Philosophies debate with Richard Carrier. Just to let you know how I go about this, I take the debate transcripts, as you can find them right here, and you can see them. I then put them into a Word document file, and I upload it here to my Chat GPT. And by the way, I use Chat. If you don't like Chat, I don't care. I'm not relying on it. I have right behind me probably 500, 600, 700 books. I don't know the exact amount. My Kindle has almost 700 books. This is neuroscience right here, how God changes the brain. Non-Christian, Newberg, A History of Western Philosophy, Bertrand Russell, Richard Dawkins, River Out of Eden, The Atheist Guide to Reality, Alex Rosenberg, David Hume, etc., etc. I also have more Richard Dawkins books. I have a Sean Carroll book. So once again, if me using chat bothers you, I don't care. If it hinders our conversation, I'll stop using it for you because you will try to run away from it. I know you will, because I always say, give me unbiased. And if you have a chat in front of you, unbiased should basically result in the same thing. So anyways, going back to what I do is I take those transcripts, put them into a Word doc because they're too much to actually copy and paste into there. And then I put it in here. And if you want to see the PDF, this is what the PDF looks like. So it's basically 101 pages. Look at that. That's how much the transcripts are from a typical debate. About 101 pages all the way down to here. And I put it in. And then I ask it, I say, give me an unbiased summary of this debate. Give grade to each person and the winner. Okay, feel free to chat. Let me know where you're at. What's up, everybody? Glad that you're tuning in. So Mike Jones is his real name. He's going to be presenting theism, idealism. These are going to be his main arguments: idealism, emergent universe argument, quantum cognition correlations. By the way, I haven't even listened to the debate yet. Haven't even listened to it. And I load all this in here. So if you want to know how a person with a doctorate goes about doing research with debates now in the 21st century, this is now what I do. I dropped a 100-page transcript of the debate that we'll be reviewing, mostly just the talking points at the beginning, their opening statements. I dropped it into my chat and asked it to summarize. So I got his arguments. Then I got Richard Carrier's arguments. Okay, so they're right here. And then I asked him to give a grade. Mike Jones. Now, this shows you I'm a Christian, right? Now, listen to me, all my donkey brain friends who keep thinking I'm using chat to prove my point. Listen to me. And once again, I'm going to clarify this. Donkey brained is just a nice way of calling fools. And the Bible calls people fools all the time, and I pity the fool, okay? So listen to me, all my donkey brain people who complain about chat. I asked it to give me an unbiased grade. I know that it has all of my Christian content in here. I'm going to use that in just a moment, but I asked it to give me an unbiased grade. Mike Jones got a B+. Here's strength and weaknesses. Richard Carrier, ooh, the atheist scored higher. So stop telling me, those of you who listen to me, oh, he runs to Chat GPT. I'm not running to it. Obviously, when I watch this, I might still think Mike Jones won. I don't care. I'm asking chat to be as unbiased as it can, because I don't want donkey-brained atheists telling me in the chats who they think won. And I know that I can just be biased as a Christian, and I just don't want to rely on that. I'm going to do my best to now see what is unbiased. Here's a way that I check it. Here's how I guard myself from not thinking I'm smarter than I really am, to having a bias. The Dunning-Kruger effect, or all these other effects on me, confirmation bias, etc. So it says that he outscores him basically by 1 degree, from B+ to A-. Everybody sees that, right? Now, he's going to clarify that it was a narrow margin, and he goes through the final verdict. Okay. Now, what I asked it to do, chat, was to now give me a point-by-point, side-by-side comparison. This is what I do. If you don't like it, once again, I don't care what you don't like. I don't care. I'm telling you what I do on my live show. And then if you want to come get some, you can come get some. Do you understand? You can come get some. If you are a cult that doesn't believe Jesus is God, if you don't think abortion is murder, if you don't think Islam is demonic or atheism is folly, you can come get some. Okay? I'm telling you how I break down stuff. So this is how it breaks it down. Now the chat's going to try to give me unbiased, high, then Carrier wins on the overall framework. This is what I do. Okay? This is what I do. And I'm going to be reviewing this today. But I go through this before I even hit play. Here we go, baby. I'm going to mention you right now. Now you're mentioned. Welcome to the live feed. Okay? Don't know if I'll do that every time. I go through this so that I can have an idea of what was just said. That I don't listen to donkey-brained atheists in the comment section for whatever reason who love to wet their pants and pee all over the comment section. Those of you who have children and know what it's like when urine comes on the scene and how it smells, or a dirty diaper and poop. These atheists in comments are like little chat bots, like pooping pigeons on chess games, and I'm so tired of it. So I don't even hardly read the comments anymore. I drop in the 100 pages of the transcripts. I ask chat to grade it point by point. Do you see what I did here? Right? You see what I did. Now, what does it say? I am a Christian. I am a Christian. And what does it say? That Dr. Richard Carrier won 6-2, but was so close in all of those areas that when he gave them a letter grade, it was the Christian B+ and Richard Carrier an A-. Right? So I just want you to see that this is what I'll use. Now, what do I say to it? Now I say, because I know that it knows my points. Okay. Do you all understand this? Please hear me on this. I know that it understands my points. I have two main arguments, technically three, but two of them are similar, that I use against people like Richard Carrier. The first one is naturalism defeated by divine conceptualism. Okay. Divine conceptualism is one of the arguments that I use against atheists. Okay. I have it here. Chat reviewed it for me to make sure that I was on point for what I believed in. The other one that I use is the self dilemma, the dilemma from the self. And I have this into my chat as well, that either way, as an atheist, if there is a self or if there isn't a self, you blow yourself up. Okay. So if you are an atheist and you want to deny yourself, you're going to blow yourself up. If you're an atheist and then you're going to say that you do somehow have a self and you can't ground it in theism, you blow yourself up. Okay. So I have these arguments. And what I then asked my chat, okay, you have your chat that knows your way of doing things, right? I asked my chat, how could I defeat these arguments? And then now it puts it into my perspective and how I would argue against him. And I asked him to put it into then syllogisms so that I could see it. And so this is how it went through as a summary, defeating the points. So once again, God bless anybody who's here. Even if you don't like me, I still like you. I love you. God bless you. Now listen, you can come get some anytime you want. And I don't care if you use chat as well. You just need to explain how the points that I have that I believe refute your points, how it refutes it. Just don't tell me and assert it. Explain how it happens. So, for example, we're not just doing today lectures and sermonizing. I want to see chokeholds of points. I want to see points knocked out. That's one of the reasons why I don't want to show up on atheist debate channels or even Christian debate channels, because I want when you're knocked out to be knocked out. I don't want you to get knocked out in the introduction or in the opening statements or the rebuttal, and then you keep on limping along like you got some word solid thing to say. No, I want you to get knocked out, to be knocked out like backyard fights. That's what I want to see happen. Okay? That's what I want to see happen. I want to see points destroyed and brought down for the glory of Jesus Christ. And I don't want to waste my time on 2-hour discussions where we go back and forth. We can't even get across point one. We can't even handle point one. So that's just where I'm at. Now, here's all the breakdown. Then I asked it to now put it into that syllogism form, as I said before. Now, do you see how I watch debates now in the 21st century? And I just say this. Now, you could tell I'm a little intense right now. I say this because I see people going to the comments, acting like they know stuff, and they don't. And then when we see the debates actually happen, they're totally different than what the comments are saying. So if you go to the comments first, as some people do, and then you watch the debate, you're like, what was that? You know, like the comments were totally just boasting in themselves and their own person that they believe won. I don't want to think that way. I want to start off at the beginning, knowing an unbiased understanding, or just watch it without it, right? But I've gotten to watch so many of these debates. I want to watch it unbiased, and I want to have all the points in front of me, and I want to see, did it really go down that way? So now that we started right from the beginning, I believe Michael Jones goes first. I got him right here. I got the debate right here. At any point, if you want to come and get some, let me know, and I'll stop my review. Once I push play, they're going to do the introduction. I'll have to interact because I don't want to get copywritten, and let's have a good time. Let's review this. Like I said, more than likely, I'm just going to be looking at the opening statements, and I have it at 1.5 speed because, you know, we ain't got time for all that. All right, let's put that sound back on. Let's try that intro again.
So this bubble with causal principles can create anything it wants.
Logically necessarily, from how I've described it.
How is that not God?
Well, it doesn't have a mind.
Well,
It's not thinking, it's not
How
intelligent.
does something without a mind cause other things on its own,
I already
something
explained
acted on, and has the ability to do anything it wants? We can see computation without actually consciousness coming out, or actually understanding or knowing. So you have computation. Okay, that doesn't actually show consciousness coming out of it, because we can see computation without it. So you have a correlation in the brain. I agree. That's not evidence of a causation. You say it is. I'm asking for that evidence. He's not given it so far.
We want to welcome Zach from Maine First, which is kind of the premier organization from New England fighting for conservative influence. So Zach is a sponsor for DebateCon 6, as well as much, gentlemen, for being here. I have the timer set for you, Mike, for your 15-minute opening statement.
Zach, whoever that was.
Hey, it's Adam with Vantage.
And then they get a free commercial right here. Let's get past this. Here we go. Come on now.
Dr. Carrier for agreeing to the debate. I'll be arguing that God does exist, and we have more than enough evidence to establish this. I'll present 3 arguments for God's existence, and then make an argument from parsimony. But first, I'm going to argue idealism is true, which in a nutshell is the belief that all is fundamentally mind. We can infer this from what I would call the introspective argument. Okay, premise 1, the mind exists. No one with a mind can doubt this. As Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Premise 2, the mind and the properties of mind cannot reduce to matter. The hard problem of consciousness exists for a reason. There is no path forward to explain how consciousness could emerge from matter. Plus, everything we experience is qualia. Take bundle theory, for example, which is that physical objects exist as bundles of properties. For example, you could describe an apple as red, round, shiny, smooth, and tasty. But if you remove these properties, what is left? Well, nothing really. But these are all mental experiences, not physical. As Susan Schneider says, pure property ontologies need to take physical objects as metaphysically derivative, even objects that physics regards as fundamental. Objects are instead bundled out of properties, or they are properties. The atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel had to admit, if a mental event really is a physical event in the sense and nothing else, then the physical event by itself, once its physical properties are understood, should likewise be sufficient for the taste of sugar, the feeling of pain, or whatever it is supposed to be identical with. But it doesn't seem to be. It seems conceivable for any physical event. There should be a physical event without any experience at all. Experience of taste seems to be something extra, continually related to the brain state. But we can't.
All right, so I'm not an idealist. Basically, what he's saying is everything is reducible to mind. I believe everything is reducible to God's energies. God's essence is separate than his energy. So I make an energy essence distinction like the Eastern Fathers do. Even though I'm non-denominational, I side with Eastern Orthodoxy on a distinction between essence and energy. So before there was ever creation, in the beginning, God, Genesis 1:1, created the heavens and the earth. There was only God, one essence shared by 3 distinct persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And from their essence, they were able to, what we would say, emanate or bring forth the energies that we now know. Part of those energies were creative and did all the making and the force that came into the world. So God's Spirit brought about the laws And I'm purposely trying to say the making, because even if you believe in a Big Bang as a Christian, which you can, I know who banged it. It's God. I know the force. It's God, right? So even if he didn't have any processes, if it was just created ex nihilo, like I believe, once again, it was only his energies. And I believe the heavens and earth were created around the same time. And I believe in a young earth, though I'll never debate science with a non-believer because it's absolutely pointless. I would rather you go to heaven and believe something silly like evolution than for you to go to hell thinking that you have to be a young earth creationist to go to heaven. So that's a stumbling block for you. I have no problem with you believing some other understanding of that. But once again, Michael Jones here is an idealist. Everything's reducible to mind. I believe everything is reducible to God's energy and essence. And so for the most part, I can agree with this. He's getting very deep because he's going to be debating a formidable opponent. I like to keep things a little bit simpler than this, but I love Mike, and I think he's doing a great job.
Can't reduce the physical to the mental, because as we noted, everything we experience is mental. And using the logic of bundle theory and the binding.
And I agree with all of this right here. You cannot reduce physical to mental, and from the physical, you could never get mental, as what I believe as well in my divine conceptualism.
Problem, we can infer what constitutes as the physical can reduce to the mental. But as noted, the mental cannot reduce to the physical. Premise 3, substance dualism is false. As noted, there is no reason to posit a substance beyond.
And maybe it's just good to say, I don't believe physical is reducible then to the mental. I believe that there are different spheres of existence, where idealism believes there's only one sphere of existence, and that is mental. I don't believe that physical then gets reduced down to mental. I believe that they coexist together from the energies of God.
The qualia we experience. And substance dualism suffers from issues like the interaction problem. Therefore, from the three premises, the conclusion would follow that all is mind, and that would mean idealism is true.
Now, once again, now this is where we would disagree, because I am a substance dualist. As I just said, I believe that the mental and the physical exist together. I believe that that makes the Bible a lot more easier to understand. When he talks about the difference between your soul and your body, I do believe that the terms like spirit, soul, heart, mind, all of those things can be synonymous of each other, but there is certainly a physical aspect. Also, then the resurrection speaks to a physical aspect. And I know he has answers to that, and how the mind brings about physical bodies, and those physical bodies having soulical experiences, and yet they can be distinct in some way and yet come from the same source. I have, once again, no problem with it. It's just I wouldn't be making this argument this way. And the argument he has against substance dualism is the interaction problem of how would a spiritual or a non-physical thing interact with a physical thing. That interaction between those two substances is the energies of God. God, the Bible says, in him we live and move and breathe and have our being. So both Mike and I are going to come to a point where we believe God does it. And it's not just a God of the gaps. It's that it's impossible for any other thing to fill it in other than God. And I believe consciousness towards the atheist is that problem as well. They try to get away from having to defend the self by saying that it's an illusion of their conscious mind. But consciousness has a hard problem as well as a soft problem, and they haven't solved either. And so they appeal to mystery, the naturalism of the gaps, as it were. And we appeal to God, not a God of the gaps, but an impossibility of the contrary, that only God can be the source and the reason for consciousness, for physical objects, and for soulical experiences. Mike believes that all of those things reduce back down to the mind. I believe that they are separate in unity with each other, as the Bible says that the word of God is the only thing that can truly divide them, judging between thoughts and intentions, soul and spirit in the book of Hebrews. And so that, once again, is my point that I would make in difference to his point. But we're ultimately going to end at the same place, where it's God that gives us mind. It's God that gives us rationality, existence, reality, laws of nature. And without God, we cannot know any of those things.
If idealism is true, then our background knowledge makes it more likely that theism is true, and this will become apparent as I go through the three arguments. First, by God, I just want to say I mean a necessary immaterial mind whose nature would be ideal or absolute perfection.
And once again, for me, I agree with them that he can go from idealism to theism, no problem there. But for me, going from dualism to theism is a necessity. In other words, you cannot have a dualism without God. And it sounds like he's almost making a place that you could have some sort of an idealism without a God, though I don't know specifically what he believes in that. He's a lot more advanced in philosophy than me. I don't know if that would include Platonism or some type of a view similar to that, where something can be, or panpsychism, I think is another one. So he may be making room for that in his argument, but the argument that I make for dualism leaves no other room. Either you exist as a soul, and that's only because of God, or you're in madness right now.
So the first argument is called the emergent universe argument. So if the universe is emergent, it's emergent from a mind. If the universe is emergent, and therefore the universe is emergent from a mind. Pretty simple. I'll start by defending the second premise. The common belief today is the universe is fundamental.
I know I'm interrupting a lot right here, but I just want to say I'm going to probably agree with almost all of this. And what we were just talking about, the energies coming from the essence, that's what we'd be talking about. Out of the mind of God, shared by the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, is coming the ability to create and have an emergent universe.
Fundamentally like particles or something like quarks, but quantum field theory doesn't show that. Physicist Walter Schmidt says particles are actually waves in different types of fields. This goes for all the particles we are made of. We are all just made of waves in a field. What looks to us as a billiard ball on a billiard table is actually a bunch of waves moving from the cue to the pocket. Now, some try to say, well, everything might reduce to quantum fields, but that doesn't work either, as the philosopher of physics David John Baker notes, that many of the problems that particle interpretations have also apply to field interpretations. And as other experts have noted, Baker's conclusions are pretty decisive to this day. Now, this can get complicated, but in a nutshell, there are mathematical problems with saying quantum fields are underlying objects, like the inability to assign Fock space to quantum fields, and other issues like spontaneous symmetry breaking. As Baker concludes, it seems that in many ways, fields and particle interpretations must stand or fall together. Next slide. So just appealing to fields to escape the problems that show particles cannot be fundamental doesn't work, because a lot of the same issues come up. Philosopher of science Minor Kuhlman notes physics lacks a coherent account of fundamental issues, such as the definition of objects. It's not at all clear what a particle or field even is. Quantum field theory doesn't suggest fields are entities. Instead, at the most fundamental level, we only find structures, relations, and properties, not a material substance there. So this
Absolutely. And that's what I would agree with them. What are any of these things? They're always being described by math and then understood through philosophy. So we always go back to needing God to even understand them to do science. So that's why I rely more upon presuppositional apologetics than simply evidential, because not only is it a mystery in how these fields are formed, but even if we begin to understand how the fields are formed, the fact that we're understanding them through math and our rational mind have to have a grounding in and of itself. So for us to discover them, we are already presupposing God, the grounding that God gives as a self that only God can give. And I don't believe that there's only one kind of substance in the world. Therefore, I believe that the mind is understanding the physical because God has made it so from his energies.
is one reason physicist James Glatfelder says the very notion of materialism now appears misguided. Our worldview is shattered. Philosopher Jan Westerhoff agrees. The moral to draw from the reductionist scenario seems to be that either what is fundamental is not material, or that nothing at all is fundamental. And I'm citing so many experts here where this is not something I made up. It's coming from experts in the philosophy of physics. Essentially, our macro reality appears to be emergent from underlying information, not fundamental objects that we can call fields or particles, thus supporting the second premise.
Here's what nobody's telling you about the new bearskin hoodie.
Which is funny now because people are taking more serious the idea that we are in a, these atheists are now taking more serious the idea that we're in a virtual reality than God created us. And as some have said that aliens created us instead of God. So they would rather appeal to aliens and virtual realities than appeal to God, because we know now with information theory that the total underlying of our reality is filled with information, every part of it. So from a microscope to a telescope, it's all information. This is where we get into the teleological argument, the argument from design.
But any reference to a substance, then it can better fit with an idealist worldview, where the macro reality is merely emergent from information contingent on mind. Instead of positing an undetectable material substance that gives rise to quantum fields and particles and then somehow builds conscious agents, we stick with what we know exists, consciousness and a material reality reducible to information. So shave off all mind-dependent objects and stick with what we know. Similarly, philosopher Doreen Fraser has to say about our reality, multiple lines of argument support the conclusion that quantum field theory does not describe a world that contains particles as fundamental entities. These arguments rely on special relativistic or general relativistic premises. I've added the proposal that particles be considered fictions in another sense. Particles and quasi-particles in condensed matter physics supply physical intuitions that are useful for formulating mathematical framework for quantum field theory, but which do not represent the world even approximately.
Now, see, I want to check chat on that. So what I'll do is I'll just screenshot this here. and ask chat, because I want to know how many people believe that particles are possibly illusory. How many people believe particles can be illusions produced by underlying info like this person? So now I want to know how many people even think that way. Great question, Joe. So it's a minority. And once again, this doesn't mean that Mike has a bad argument. It's just he's appealing to a minority view of science. Hey, I do that when I take on the young earth position. I understand. I don't argue the science, but I appreciate people like Donnie from Standing for the Truth who do. But it to me is a hard sell to go to the science in a debate like this when it's a minority position, and then that can be exposed. Where why not take the philosophical position that all, not just physical objects, but all objects, whether they be possibly mathematical objects to a Platonist, a panpsychics, whatever is existing in consciousness, mind, mental, or physical, all of that information, rather, not just you say the word object, but all that information has to have a source. Now you've just circumvented having to have all of these scientists agree with you or not agree with you and getting caught up with where is the consensus, because I know that's part of how these atheists debate is they love having the consensus. But once again, if you ask them when the Christians had the consensus, did that make it true? They would say, ha, 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 of course not. Consensus doesn't make things true. But now that they have the consensus, because most people in science or in those kinds of fields have donkey brains and don't apply basic philosophical categories to what they're deciding. And that's just not me. This is from others. People rebuking atheists to atheists, rebuking people like Dr. Alex Rosenberg trying to smuggle in the word nothing, or even now, Alex O'Connor looking back at Dawkins' arguments and treatment of Thomas Aquinas. It was just straight up folly and nonsense. And yet people at that time were taking it serious, as well as, Christopher Hitchens and how he debated emotionalism with, the problem of evil, which has been solved. There is no logical problem of evil, but he thought he was so smart, touting around with an accent gibberish about how God wasn't fair to the Canaanites or whatever, right? So I learn from Michael Jones and his research. I would love to see him get the degree to back it up. I know that I think he's finished his master's. I would love for him to have the PhD like others do, just so he can enjoy that notoriety in that world. And so he doesn't have to feel like he has to keep defending himself. But of course he will, because even people like Dr. William Lane Craig in his field and Dr. Alvin Planck, get called out as well. But I just think for him, that might be a good thing to undertake in his life. But this is a minority position. Once again, I don't need it in my argument. It's any reality that can be observed has to come from the mind of God via his energies.
So no need to posit some sort of substance beyond that. We stick with an idealist ontology. Mind is fundamental, and the physical is just information or qualia. Next, we can use another correlation using quantum cognition.
And just real quick, this is why I believe in the energy essence distinction, because how does God's mind do any of this? So God's mind does this through his energies, and he may believe in that distinction as well and still hold to idealism. I don't know how he could, but maybe he does. But for me, I believe that once you have the energies, you don't have to have everything reducible down to mental. You could have states that are physical, just like Jesus has a physical body, and it's continually to be physical, and it's not merely mental. But once again, I don't know his argument as clearly as someone who can debate him on it. Like, in other words, I wouldn't debate Michael Jones on idealism versus dualism. I wouldn't do that. I would just say I'm not convinced of it, and I've listened to him explain it 3 or 4 times in different debates. I'm just not convinced of it.
And this will be an inductive argument. In 2009, physicist Diedrich Erch published a paper noting that our cognitive processes can be readily modeled using a mathematical formalism of quantum mechanics. Now, this is not just hypothetical. Psychologists have been applying quantum cognition to their field and finding it is more successful than traditional models, and has provided principled answers to the puzzles and challenges. My opponent knows that quantum cognition is independent from quantum mind research, and he's endorsed the field recently. However, the point I'm getting at is that if our inner mental world can be modeled in terms of quantum processes, similar processes that give rise to space, time, and matter, that means space, time, and matter are emergent from the underlying quantum world, but our inner mental world of consciousness and mind can be modeled via quantum processes, through the study of quantum cognition, this would suggest that what space-time emerges from would be similar or indistinguishable from that of a mind, or something that looks and acts an awfully lot like a mind.
And this is where I would agree. So whatever I was having a difference on, this is what I agree. And I love this look right here. Just the only difference of the brain, if this is the mind of God, God's mind is not physical, right? So it's mental. And I know he's saying that, but I'm just saying this for anybody watching, that when he produces this world, somehow I believe there's an intermediate part here called his power, his energies. And he does this through the person of Jesus via the Holy Spirit. And so those energies flow through these persons.
But I'd say the most parsimonious explanation is the universe is just emergent from a mind. Instead of it emerging from something that isn't a mind, it resembles and acts like a mind. In private correspondence with one researcher in this field, he said it could all just be a coincidence, but the correlations, i.e. the similarity in behavior between human concepts interacting with human minds and quantum entities interacting with fermionic matter, could be caused by the fact that both entities share the same conceptual nature. This can also
And that's awesome that he's finding out that the things of the mind and how it operates as it does consciousness or produces consciousness or emerges into consciousness. However, he's looking at that hard problem of consciousness being solved, or the soft problem, then moving into the hard problem. I think that's awesome. And if they're seeing the correlation now between the underlying physics of the world and the underlying, computations and the way that the mind works, I think that's awesome. I actually even like, this is a little bit off the subject, but I even like the comparison of the neural network to the universe. I actually like that. And I don't think that that's stretching it too far. I think that these kind of images are very cool to look at. And so it obviously goes a lot deeper than that, but I just kind of like that and how that works.
also be strengthened through the research in quantum mind theory, which I don't have time to cover now. But we can also look at the work of astrophysicist Franco Vazza and neurosurgeon Alberto Felitti, who wrote a paper on the similarities between neural networks and the cosmic web of galaxies. And they show that the properties of neural networks within the human cortex are similar to the cosmic web of galaxies, something we would expect if the universe is emergent from a mind. This is less likely if physicalism is true, but it would be predicted by idealism. Because, as philosopher of mind Bernardo Kastrup notes after drawing on their works, brains are the images or representations of conscious minds. Elsewhere, he says a brain, or the whole body by extension, is just the external appearance of a conscious agent. If the universe is emergent from a mind, we would expect the universe would in some way be the external appearance of that conscious agent in the way your brain, on idealism, is the external appearance of you.
Yeah, so that's just, I'm just not convinced of that somehow my consciousness produces a physical body that represents me. I just don't see that. I feel that that's sustained and given to me by God as well. I still think some says dualism. It may not be the cool thing right now, but I still believe that's a better way of understanding it.
So we have good reason to support the first premise as well. Now, as for the second argument, start here. It's called it's a consciousness argument. Premise one, contingent minds have either a personal explanation or a natural explanation. Theories of mind will fall into one of these two categories, or a mix, I guess you could suppose. And by personal explanation, I mean that if our consciousness cannot be reduced to natural processes or parts, and is irreducible as is, then it must come from a personal source. Premise two, idealism is true, and thus all is reducible of mind. There are various ways I could argue for this. I refer you to the prior arguments, but for the sake of time, I need to move on. So this would mean that if all is mind, one's individual consciousness cannot be reduced to natural parts or processes that are not mental in nature, therefore, conclusion one, a natural explanation cannot be the reason for contingent minds. Premise three, the explanation of contingent conscious minds is a personal explanation. And then the source would be a necessary personal source. Idealist philosophers seem to be recognizing this fact.
I agree with all of this. Other than everything is reducible to mind, I don't see why we have to have everything be reducible to mind. We could just say everything is reducible to the energies of God, and physical objects could be actually physical objects, and mental objects could be mental objects, and spiritual bodies could be spiritual bodies. So the Bible talks about this, that there's celestial realms, there's physical realms. I just don't see why everything has to be reducible to mind. I think reducible to the power and the energies of God is a better way of saying it. And I'm not convinced of the other way. But once again, I'm not here to try to debate IP. He's on our team.
One way or another.
Just answering someone who's come by to check us out. Thank you. I am reviewing the debate between IP and Richard Carrier at the latest modern day debate conference that they had.
Kastrup says the whole universe is a mind, but not in your individual psyche alone, for mind extends far beyond the boundaries of personal introspection. Helen Yetter Chapel says external reality is a vast unity of consciousness independent from all finite minds. But this would lead to a theistic conclusion. If all is mind, and yet we are individually contingent, then we still must come from somewhere, but we as conscious agents are irreducible to smaller parts that make up our consciousness. It would reasonably follow our minds come from a greater mind that is the grounding of all contingent minds. Therefore, this is who we would call God, therefore God exists.
The body scanner reveals the brutal truth about...
And he could do that same argument from contingency, just about anything. He could excuse me, I believe he can make the same argument for God being the only grounding for all that is contingent. So we don't really have to get into idealism. I think he already did that in his first argument. His second argument is kind of a reiteration of that, but he could just stay with contingency, that this doesn't have to be. It is not necessary. So the difference between contingent and necessary is necessary. There's no possibility that 2 + 2 could ever equal anything other than 4. So it's necessary that math exists in this form. It's contingent that I have 2 apples and 2 oranges, and that makes 4. I know it's probably, excuse me, a bad example, but that's kind of the idea. And then you can look at existence. We are contingent in our existence. We don't have to exist. The universe doesn't have to exist, etc. But if you have all of these contingent objects and contingent things, what is the necessary thing or object that produces all of these contingent things? Because contingent things cannot keep producing contingent things and moving backwards. So you would then run into an argument that has no beginning. And in other words, it would be reduced to, and I just can't, what is that word? Give me just a moment here. An argument that runs backwards. Argument that runs backwards to folly. I can't even remember it. I say this term all the time, and it's just totally slipped my mind. Of course it did. What is the argument for needing a necessary cause, not contingent? This phrase, I just cannot think of it, that you cannot have it going backwards continually, because if you don't have a necessary cause, contingent things can't start each other. And then, what is, this is everything I'm looking, I still don't have the word here. What is it? Impossible to run backwards called. Oh, it's just right at the tip of my tongue. Irreversibility, cosmological, no, cannot believe this, no. It's when you keep going and never stop. I know somebody's watching this either by video at some point and is saying it, and I'm going to say it, keep going backward. Yes, infinite regress. Thank you, Jesus. It's just, oh my gosh. Sorry about that. Anybody who endured that, even those watching this back, my goodness. And so when he did the contingency argument based on the mind, he didn't have to use the mind as the example. He could have used anything that's contingent, and thus needing a necessary starting place to avoid the infinite regress. Don't we all feel better now that we know that?
Argument. Premise 1, non-natural moral realism is true. This is the view that moral facts exist objectively and are not reducible in natural properties like happiness or anything in nature. They cannot be natural because of issues like the is-ought problem or G.E. Moore's open question argument. Something that is in nature is not evidence of something we ought to do. But as numerous philosophers note, moral realism is intuitive, and the way that moral values and duties manifest in reality implies they are objective. So, moving on, premise 2, if objective moral values and duties exist, they are personal in nature. Take moral prescriptions. They do not exist in physical nature. The natural world only contains descriptions. Prescriptions exist between minds. I could prescribe you the task of guarding me at this event, but that prescription exists between 2 minds. So if we are bound to objective prescriptions, that implies they come from a prescriber. As Peter S. Williams says, I have moral obligations, but since I can't be obligated by anything non-personal, e.g. the evolutionary history of my species, I must be obligated by something personal. Since there are objective moral obligations that transcend all finite persons or groups thereof, there must therefore be a transcendent personal reality to whom we are fundamentally obligated. Take the moral ideal. If there is an objective moral ideal, you will picture an agent who always acts right and is perfectly virtuous. But that is necessarily an agent, not mere abstract principles divorced from something personal. If there is an objective ideal, it would be a perfect moral agent. From a perfect mind would come perfect principles of behavior.
And just to make sure I stop here, just not get copywritten, though I don't think modern day debate would copyright strike, but just to add my 2 cents in, I agree with all of this. And then if you deny objective morals, you're in madness. So confess Christ or confess madness.
Take moral guilt. Peter S. Williams says, since it would be inappropriate to feel guilt or shame before an abstract, impersonal moral principle, and since it is appropriate to feel guilt and shame before the objective moral law, that moral law cannot be an abstract moral principle. In other words, objective moral values must be ontologically grounded in a transcendent personality, before whom it is appropriate to feel moral guilt. So the very ontology of objective moral values and duties are personal in nature. Premise 3, if objective moral values and duties are personal, then they are grounded in a personal source. Premise 4, this personal source is what we call God. Now, it is more parsimonious to posit one entity which encompasses all of objective moral values and duties, rather than multiple ones. So we can simply posit objective goodness itself, which would encompass all values and duties, and that would be personal in nature. Therefore, God exists. Now, I fully expect my opponent will be able to come up with alternative explanations to the point I raised, but a major obstacle for him is offering an alternative explanation of reality that is more plausible and parsimonious. What I mean is I suspect you will have an alternative explanation for consciousness, for moral realism, I read his paper recently, and the contingency of the universe. But notice what will happen. He will be demonstrating theism is more parsimonious, because we can explain all of this data with one explanation. A fundamental mind exists, which explains why the universe exists, why consciousness exists, why moral realism exists, and many other aspects of reality I don't have time to cover here, like other issues, for example. So theistic idealism has better explanatory scope, power.
Absolutely. I mean, for sure, even though I'm not an theistic idealist, though I don't believe in theistic idealism, for sure, it's way better than atheism. It's not even close. It's like a 0 to a 1. You can't build off of atheism. The 1 of idealism, you can keep building and adjusting.
Plausibility is the least ad hoc. Unless my opponent can offer a simpler explanation that can account for all this data I presented, we will have to conclude that theism is the best explanation of reality until we can come up with more data. Now, my opponent has said on his blog that he in articles like The Problem of Nothing and his reply on Kuhn's cosmology, that he thinks an absolute nothing brought about the universe. Not what Lawrence Krauss says, he's very clear about that, but in literal absolute nothing.
Oh my gosh, look at this. This is why I say this is donkey brain. And I've been telling this to people. I'm so glad I'm watching. I'm watching this for the first time with you guys reacting right now. I am so glad that this is coming out into the light, because people think we're making this up. First of all, when people like Krauss has a universe from nothing, and other people like them argue that, okay, Volinkin, I believe, argued a universe from nothing. Let me double check. Universes from nothing. Universes from nothing. Volinkin. Let me see here. Universe from nothing. Volinkin. Volinkin. Yes. Work suggested that, yeah. Physicist Alexander Volinkin's work suggests that the universe could have been created from a state of nothing, not absolute nothingness. So Krauss, like Alexander Volinkin, will smuggle in this nothing and then change what the nothing is. So they'll actually have papers that suggest it, right? A universe from nothing. See, like that, Alexander Volinkin. And then a creation of our universe from nothing, right? Like, so he'll do talks like that. And then he wrote a book, Volinkin, on universes coming out of nothing. Yeah, here we go. Creation of Universes from Nothing, 1982, Volinkin, right? So they'll use that nothing, just like Krauss will use that nothing deceptively to then smuggle in, quantum vacuums or whatever, like something underlying that nothing, right? But now notice that there's other people like Richard Carrier, according to IP, which we're going to see if that's true, and I believe that is, because I don't see why you would lie. They believe in absolute nothings being responsible for the universe.
He says in his blog post, Kuhn's Cosmology, whereas if you just let it go without any intelligent control, then a nothing will almost certainly collapse into something. That is absurd, though. That's like saying 0 + 2 = 1,000,000. It doesn't make any sense. To collapse into something, it has to be something. He's also said an actual nothing is therefore even more likely to randomly create rabbits and Death Stars in his article, The Problem of Nothing, which is, of course, absurd. That doesn't make any sense. This is what he has offered as an alternative to theism, as an explanation for why there is something rather than nothing, I guess, or why the universe exists. But this is absurd. He will need to defend this tonight against a theistic proposal, show that is more plausible, more parsimonious, and in fact is logically coherent. Let's remember the Duhem-Quine thesis: no theory can be confirmed in isolation from its background assumptions. If that's one of his background assumptions, he'll need to defend that as a better explanation than theism. Thank you.
Oh, let's get it.
Thank you for that opening, Mike. We will kick it over to Dr. Richard Carrier. I have the timer set for you on your first word, Dr. Carrier, for your opening.
A lot of people ask us, what's the difference between mud water and mushroom coffee?
All right, first mic check though. Does this sound good? Sounds good if I sit right here? We're all right. Okay, I'm ready to start.
Perfect.
So the big question here is that we have to start with how we decide what is true. So in terms of best explanations, better and worse explanations. So a good explanation will have parsimony, as Michael said. It will have fewer, parsimony means fewer assumptions. So you're starting with a simpler model to explain more complex models.
Oh my gosh. Do you understand what we just entered into right here? We entered right into his epistemology. This guy is going to tell us how to make value judgments about good arguments. This is why I love IP. I love Mike Jones. He's amazing. He's so smart, probably so much smarter than me. But this is where I would rock this guy on his epistemology using presuppositionalism. This guy's coming in believing he's already got a brain that is functioning, that is good enough for him to make decisions in this debate and tell us that our ability to discern the truth is not as good as his ability to discern the truth. I want to know in his worldview, what is even truth? How do meat brains that in his mind, what he believes, emerge into consciousness and make selves an illusion have any correspondence to reality? I would rock him so hard all night long. I would rock him all night long with Hume's problem of induction. I want to see him take the leap over the creek of Hume's problem of induction. That would just be the first thing I would want him to do. But I'm already interrupting him, and the guy's only started here. And he's saying, hey, we're going to start about how we know what explanation is the best explanation. How do you know that? Why do meat brains with brain fizz have any of that? And doing more science does not help you.
Models rather than the other way around. Another thing that you're looking at is precedent. What has usually turned out to be the explanation of things? So for instance, God does not usually turn out to be the explanation of things. No supernatural agent usually turns out to be the explanation of things. When we investigate what explains lightning, evolution, the species of animals.
He's the explanation of everything. People who were pagans who thought that God literally did things in the heavens like an actual person up there, making lightning and rain and all of that, weren't the people of the Bible who believed that God could send it, but that God was from another realm. That's why they didn't make idols. So this idea that God is not the explanation for anything because we thought God did this or God did that, it's not even addressing the Christian or Judeo-Christian claim of God being spiritual and putting into action the forces of this world and being responsible for them. So before he even gets into knowing how to discern what is God and what isn't God, the whole entire show at its foundation is developed by God, including the logic he's using right now and the math that he will employ and all of the rules that he hopes will be consistent throughout this debate. Now, once again, this is not just me saying this, okay? This is David Hume's problem of induction. Oh my goodness, you have reached the limit of devices. Okay, so I'm going to go to another screen while I let this play so that I can actually open up a book on this screen, because for some reason, when I do my live feeds, I keep getting into having too many books on too many things. And I'll show you the problem of induction summarized by Bertrand Russell, who also wrote the book, Why Am I Not a Christian? But let's let him ramble on a little bit, word solid, about how smart he thinks he can be without explaining anything of his epistemology. When in this debate right here, notice the debate is, does God exist? And I wish Mike would have brought to him, you can't even do this debate without God existing.
Animals and so on. We always find natural causes. So we should expect natural causes for any future explanation that we haven't caught at yet. Now, that doesn't prove it. It's just this is a good explanation. A good explanation.
There is no such thing as a good explanation in his worldview. I do not want to give him permission to do any of this. I don't want to grant him any of this. And this is where I wish, now knowing that he's going to go in this direction so strong, I wish that IP would have nailed him and not allowed him to do any of this nonsense right here, because this kind of gives the impression that we're both coming here with equal ground and he's just going to explain things a little bit better. Okay. Now, this is Bertrand Russell's book, The History of Western Philosophy. Okay. And this is his section on dealing with Hume's problem of induction. Okay. So just notice he's quoting Hume right here. And I have Hume's book. Okay. Oh, every time I get into this, I get lost. I don't want to spend too much time here because I want to listen to the rest of this debate. The supposition that the future resembles the past is not founded. Oh, Lord, help me here. Help me be patient, right? Okay, let's just read this here, because here we are. This is where we're at, right? Let's try this again. Okay, watch right here. Let me highlight just this section here. Okay. The supposition that the future resembles the past is not founded on arguments of any kind. So you can't make an argument of science induction, the best guess, or where the best where the hypothesis that has the most evidence. You can't even do that because you have no foundation that your future will resemble the past. So you could say that water boils at X degrees, and you can now say, I now know that's the best explanation for why water starts to bubble over a fire, because I've observed it 100 times, water boiling at this degree, right? You could say that. But what Hume is saying is that you would have no ability to now know tomorrow, the future, is going to be like all your days in the past. There is no argument you can give by testing water every day to know that tomorrow's water will be the same. That's why in the medieval times or in the scientific revolution, they would say all things being equal, or in other words, for God to sustain all things as they are. This is how we can do our experimentation. So often when these naturalists get into the scientific laboratory, they're like, oh, I don't need God here. I just run numbers. Yes, you needed God to know that these things would work the same. You're trusting that. You're trusting that. This is not my opinion. This is one of the greatest atheists of the 18th century, rocking his own people because he came to the realization, I can't prove science with science. The supposition that the future resembles the past is not founded on any argument, founded on arguments of any kind, but it is derived entirely from habit. The conclusion is one of complete skepticism. You can't know anything. All probable reasoning is nothing but a species of sensation. Tis not solely in poetry and music we must follow our taste and sentiment, but likewise in philosophy. When I'm convinced of any principle, 'tis only an idea which strikes more strongly upon me. When I give the preference to one set of arguments above another, I do nothing but decide from my feeling concerning the superiority of their influence. Objects have no discoverable connection together, nor is it from any other principle but custom operating upon the imagination that we may draw any inference from the appearance of one to the existence of another. You don't even know if objects exist. It is an attempt to introduce the experimental method of reasoning into moral subjects. It is evidence that he started out with the belief that the scientific method yields truth, the whole truth. This is Russell talking about Hume, and nothing but the truth. He ended, however, with the conviction that belief is never rational. That's how he ends. So I'm just going to discover the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. But at the end of Hume's discovery is none of it's rational, since we know nothing. After setting forth the arguments for skepticism, he goes on not to refute the arguments, but to fall back on natural credulity. I wish I could just stop getting that thing up here. Oh, the above is the beginning of a section of skepticism with regard to the senses. After a long discussion, this section ends with the following conclusion. The skeptical doubt, both with respect to reason and the senses, is a malady. Malady. Let me just get the definition. I believe that's speaking towards something crazy. Yes, a disease or a lameness. So look at this. This skeptical doubt, both with respect to reason and the senses, is a disease which can never be radically cured, but must return upon us every moment. However, we may chase it away and sometimes may seem entirely free from it, carelessness and inattention alone can afford us any remedy. Carelessness and inattention alone can afford us any remedy. So just not paying attention to it makes you feel better. For this reason, I rely entirely upon them and take it for granted, whatever may be the reader's opinion at this present moment, that an hour hence he will be persuaded there is both an external and an internal world. So he just takes it for granted, but there is no proof that any of this exists. There is no proof that any of this exists. And I'm just trying to get to the next point. Now, notice this. Hume's philosophy, which he mocks philosophy, Hume does. And now Bertrand Russell summarizes Hume's philosophy, true or false, represents the bankruptcy of 18th century reasonableness, which Richard Carrier, in our review of the debate, is taking for granted. He starts out with Locke with the intention of being sensible and empirical, taking nothing on trust, but seeking whatever instruction is to be obtained from experience and observation. I'm only going to trust what I can do through science. But having a better intellect than Locke's, a greater acuteness in analysis, and a smaller capacity for accepting comfortable inconsistencies, he arrives at the disastrous. This is Hume's problem of induction, using science to prove science, because you don't even know if the future is going to be like the past. He arrives at the disastrous conclusion that from experience and observation, nothing can be learned. Nothing can be learned. There is no such thing as rational belief. Glad I did that. I hope somebody got something from that. So now debating Richard Carrier, right? IP has given this man the ability to feel like somehow he can make arguments about the world around him when he has no grounding for any reality, let alone he does not have a grounding for reality. He has no grounding for rationality, not according to me, not according to Joe who reads his Bible and the Bible tells me so, but according to Hume. And then Russell, at the end of his chapter on Hume, concludes there is no answer to Hume's problem except to just insert a metaphysical principle that you have no evidence for. And so this is the madness of a scientism, a naturalism, a materialism, anything you want to call it, reduces down to madness.
Explanation builds on precedents that we already have, and it starts with simpler hypotheses than we're trying to explain. And the third principle is that if the evidence is more likely on your explanation, in other words, if it's exactly what you expect on your explanation, then that's good evidence for your theory. Whereas if that
you have zero evidence for any theory, you have zero evidence for the natural world, you have zero evidence for the tomorrow being like the past, 0, 0, 0, 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals 0.
That evidence is not quite as expected on an alternative theory, then your theory is better than that other theory. How much better depends on how much the evidence is unexpected.
Yeah, and let me just show this to you real quick, because I have an argument here based on values, and that's just what he's doing, is he's just making values, and he's thinking that he has the ability to decide. So here's one of my arguments. It's a very simple argument. What is the foundation for your value judgments? How do you know that Michael Jones, Dr. Carrier, how do you know that Michael Jones is not doing as good as you are with the evidence? How do you know that? So now if you're going to say 1 to 10, where does the evidence lie? Which I was having here, how similar is this? I'll just put here, what he's saying is, where is the most evidence? That's what he is asking, right? And he's looking at this debate of his hypothesis versus somebody else's hypothesis. And he's saying that maybe Michael Jones and idealism only maybe has a 2 on the level of here of what's the most evidence, and he may think that he has a 6 or a 7 on the most evidence. What I'm asking him is, where does this even come from? Where does the ability for you to sort out and value evidences come from? Why do you have the ability to do such a thing, and how is that rational? How does rationality and your brain play out through chemicals? That's all we see. You only see correlation, but no causation of consciousness, even if I granted to him that it was emergent. How do you get from an emergent consciousness to now making value judgments that can determine someone's to be greater or lesser, or yours to be greater or lesser to the truth? What is the truth? What are you judging the truth by? What are these standards? And how do you have the ability to employ them and to say one is doing good or bad at value judgments? None of this, zero of this makes any sense in his worldview.
On that other theory, that's how you compare quality of evidence. Strong evidence is when the evidence is exactly what you expect on your theory and not at all what you expect on the alternate theory. Small evidence that teeters in a correct direction, one direction, but isn't overwhelmingly powerful. That kind of evidence is maybe slightly expected on the alternative explanation, but it's totally expected on your explanation. So when we do these kinds of comparisons, we want to look for these three things: precedent, simplicity, and how likely is the evidence overall. And we're going to bring all the evidence in. We can't leave evidence out when we ask these questions. So I'm going to test Michael's case using these principles. Also, I should point out that I'm going to defend naturalism. Every time I say atheism, I mean naturalism. I'm not defending supernatural atheisms or any other form of atheism. And that matters because if we define naturalism as the view that mindless natural causes explain everything that happens in or exists, then that leads to certain predictions about what can and can't happen and what we can expect and not expect. And that will matter as we continue through this argument. So let's look at Michael's
Of course,
argument.
it matters, but there's nothing that he can do to discern these things. In naturalism, without a mind grounding these things, is his mind the result, or is his, well, let's just start here at Darwin's problem, because Darwin said, hey, if evolution is true in this way, then our mind evolved from, these lower species and gave us the mind that we have today. And it wasn't seeking truth, it was seeking survival. So why should we trust it, right? So now I have to ask him, where in the world did your mind or consciousness, whatever he wants to call it, which I always think is an equivocation. They deny the mind or the self, and they'll talk about it as consciousness, but then you ask them to describe it, and they're describing the same exact thing. And then a duck by any other name is still a duck, or a rose by any other name is still a rose, right? And so now what I want to ask him is not only that, but then I want to ask him, when it comes down to these points you're about ready to lay out to me as a naturalist, how does naturalism give you the ability to be introspective towards naturalism? How does naturalism look in on itself? How do these chemicals and these molecules and these things that we observe in the physical world able to look in on themselves and to test themselves? Are you the root of all knowledge, my friend? Of course not. So he discovers laws and he tests these laws and he tries to see where the evidence leads, right? But he has zero explanation to how he's a knower, how is he an observer, and then how these laws were there before he got there. What is the origin of these laws? What is the origin of his philosophy or his analytics or his method of induction? What are the origin of these things that he's employing on this discovery of atheism and naturalism, which I'm glad he says that they're basically the same. And 99.99% of the time they are the same, except for some people who are trying to be so slick right now. But most of the time, atheism is naturalism, and it is a knowledge claim. No, God, you're saying you know something. Agnosticism is saying you don't know something.
Let's hear that. So he starts with this idea of idealism, and that mind cannot reduce to matter. I think what he really means is what we call in philosophy qualia, which is a particular term for what it is like to be conscious. We can explain everything about mind, like thinking and reason and understanding and knowledge and stuff, without reference to qualia. But so I think what he's referring to is qualia, the state of it, the redness of red, the smell of an apple, and things like that. What it's like to be conscious. That his argument is that cannot reduce to matter. Now, I actually there are several people, Daniel Dennett and Alan Cottrell and Patricia Churchland and many others, Andrew Melnick, Yegwon Kim, and so on.
Daniel Dennett, who believes that we are in a hallucination of our own chemicals, that there's not a real you,
have all argued that you actually can reduce qualia to essentially computational physics and physical operations of the brain as a computer in a sense. And so we know.
You said, oh my gosh, you can reduce it down. See, this is what they're going to say. You can reduce it down to physicalism. Then right now I'm not talking to a person. Objects are not persons. And so if it can all be reduced down to physicalism, you're not a person. So stop pretending to be a person, right?
it's theoretically possible to do this. And I actually do it in a much more specific way, explaining how qualia is an inevitable outcome of processing distinctions in the world. So when you are building a model, when your brain is building a model of the world that you're in, it has to make distinctions between things in that model: vision, hearing, colors, shapes, distances, and so on. The very fact of computing those things cannot be experienced any other way than as qualia. So that in fact, qualia are an inevitable product of any model computing, which means that certain robots we've built that do this kind of modeling probably also experience qualia. Now, of course, they won't experience it in relation to a person, because what we are is a model of ourselves. So, and we have a lot of evidence for this from mind-brain
Yeah,
physics.
they're not persons. And then what are you? Are you a person? Because if you're not a person, then there's no point in debating with you. If you are a person, you've just undercut your whole belief system. And not only have you undercut your belief system through this qualia nonsense, but you've undercut yourself from the very beginning by presupposing the natural world and that it can be seen through patterns and done through testing and hypotheses with theses and testing and experimentation. And you have none of that explained in your worldview. You're just assuming it.
About how the model can go wrong, which teaches us what is actually happening in terms of how our mind is building a model. Our brain is building a model of what's going on in itself. The brain is actually trying to model what's going on in itself, and it can make mistakes doing that, and it can make mistakes in a way that only makes sense if what it's doing is trying to build that model and making those mistakes sometimes. And
Once again, it doesn't mean that because the brain can make mistakes, that it doesn't mean that there's not such thing as a self or qualia or experience. What it shows, as we have always said, especially as substance dualists, is that the self uses the brain like a pianist uses a piano. And if there are things wrong with it, no matter how good the pianist is, they can't perform the same functions. And so the brain can be deceptive in many ways. And the Bible actually talks about this as your flesh, and that your flesh is evil and tends towards evil and is very instinctual, but you are to bring it under control. And right now in the psychological world, like Jeffrey Schwartz, You Are Not Your Brain, is teaching us, is that one of the greatest breakthroughs that they are finding out is like neuroplasticity, is the ability in counseling, cognitive brain therapy, CBT, is to begin to understand that you are not your brain and that you can interact with your thoughts and not receive them. And so, like I said, Jeffrey Schwartz, You Are Not Your Brain, one of the things that they see is that when you say you are not anxious, but you have anxiety, just like you're not cancer, but you can have cancer, they can retrain the brain to understand that it is not in control, but the self is. So the self can reframe the mind and actually have physical impact into how the brain responds. And we've actually seen this, like positive mental attitude, prayers, meditation. These kinds of things actually show up on brain scans and in physical health, as well as the opposite, that stress, negative thinking, and worry can also show up in the brain. And as Dr. Amen has shown, that he's done more brain scans than anybody else in the whole world, is that the way you heal the soul is by healing that hardware. So that hardware is like your brain, and your soul gets a healing through it because it's not tormented by this brain. That's why I believe schizophrenia is real, mental illness is real. And what's happening there is that the self is suffering in this kind of problem with their hardware. So the brain is something like that, a hardware example, computer example, but it's not the self. The self can observe this problem and then interact with this problem. And so just simply saying you are your brain, and then your brain is a function of just hard laws of physics, doesn't explain any of this that's going on right here. And that's why idealism explains it so much better. Panpsychism is better than this. Platonism is better than this. And so for him just to be strictly a naturalist like Daniel Dennett and Alex Rosenberg, in other words, they now not only are incorrect without any foundation and contradicting themselves all along the way, stumbling down this path of folly and being donkey-brained, but like Alex Rosenberg says at the end of his book, they have no solution for the problems of angst inside the soul, which at the end of his book, after he says the self is an illusion, at the book, The Atheist Guide to Reality, he says, if you can't take it, then take Prozac, because he offers no healing for the self, but just giving drugs to the mental hardware, the brain hardware, right? And that doesn't change anything. And that's why psychiatry and psychology is having a somewhat of a renaissance, reminding people of the biblical understanding that you are not your brain, you are not your body, and that you can renew these things through the renewing of your mind. And I'll get that from Alex Rosenberg's book as we go on here.
It does. So even the relation to yourself, the qualia of consciousness itself, that you are a person seeing a thing and hearing a thing and thinking about other versus you, even that is a product of model building, and there's no other way it could be like than to do that. And maybe we'll get more into that in rebuttals and so on. But that's the basic position I take. And for those who want to find the breadcrumb to begin following all my articles on that, my article "Touch All the Way Down" is the key article to go for that. And I'm not alone in making these arguments. This is, like I said, so many physicists and philosophers have done this. In fact, most philosophers, according to the latest Phil Papers survey, are physicalists, mind-brain physicalists like me. We think it can all reduce.
Yeah, they're donkey brained like you. And sadly, it's causing a suicide epidemic and a mental health epidemic. And it needs to be stepped away from this. And the reality of it needs to come back to boots on the ground, what it's like when you tell people you're just a brain. Because if your brain is sick, then you're sick. And anything else that you have about yourself and a better life and dreams and visions, those are all just illusions. So as I'm about ready to show you here from Alex Rosenberg, if you don't like it, just take Prozac.
Matter as essentially in some form an inevitable product of computing.
This Black Friday gift cleans your retainer at the touch of a button.
He doesn't explain why anything computes to begin with. He hasn't overcome Hume's problem of induction. And I don't care. Let me just say this very clearly. I don't care how much people in the atheistic world may have a problem with us bringing up Hume's problem of induction. I don't care. I don't care if they say, well, that's just something we've just learned to get past and we don't care anymore. I don't care that you don't care. The problem is staring you right in the face. You have no answer to the biggest problem that is in your worldview. Your worldview is taking for granted evidence. You're taking for granted the ability to do the scientific method, and you cannot do it without the help of God to ground it. It is the impossibility of the contrary. And if you go to contingent objects, the universe, multi-universe, etc., you will be in an infinite regress. Now, I'm going to show here in Alex Rosenberg's book, as I pull it up here, that this is not just pie in the sky thinking. This is actually reality. So imagine taking this philosophy, right, into the real world and then having psychiatrists and psychologists use this donkey brain thinking as a way of prescribing medicine and help to people. Okay. So notice this right here. This is the end of Dr. Alex Rosenberg's book, The Atheist Guide to Reality. Okay. This is where he has already told people that there is no morals. There's no right and wrong. There is no God. Okay, look at it. Is there a God? No. What is the nature of reality? Whatever physics says it is. You understand how stupid that sounds? Physics says nothing. And the problem of induction rocks him right here. You can't learn anything from physics unless you are an observer and know that you are in the rational, know that you're in the real world, not an illusion or not a poached egg. You have to be here as an observer. And then you have to be able to interact with the world to understand physics. And then once you do, you realize you did not invent these laws. You are discovering these laws. So how does your chemicals in your brain understand laws that were here before the chemicals in your brain discovered them or understood them? How do you explain where they were grounded? How were they discoverable? In what ways were they made to be discoverable? How are they designed and why are they designed in a way where you can look with chemicals in an emergent consciousness and understand physics, right? And then what is the purpose of the universe? There is none, while he writes a book with purpose, okay? So I just want to show you. This is Alex Donkey-Brained Rosenberg, who I love, the fool who I love, okay? And I pray for his salvation in Jesus' name, all right? This is what he says. Not me, just like I showed you with Hume. And it's so funny because I remember talking to some people about this and they were like, well, I don't care what he says and I don't care what this guy says. Well, of course you don't care what they say now that they're rocking you, of course. So you just want to make up atheism as you go along. But I like that at least Richard Carrier is bringing up who he's listening to, Daniel Dennett and others. And I have Daniel Dennett's book here, and it's just as much folly as could be. And I actually did a reaction to these guys at a round table talking about how they're not selves while acting as selves. So notice this. The self, the person, the I inside the body is an illusion, along with all the others, the illusions of morality. Now notice this. Isn't it something how we all share these same illusions? Isn't it something how now he talks about philosophers share his donkey-brained ideas, but isn't it something how the majority of the people of the world have these ideas of self, these ideas of value? So thank God the majority of the people in the world are not like him, right? So if you want to talk numbers, think about the majority of people in the world. And I believe that the majority of medical doctors actually doing medicine are believers in God. And let me just get that stat up here, because they oftentimes talk about people in these academic places, having a high atheism. And most of the time it's because they don't know what they don't know. As you can see, their worldview getting rocked right now. Is it true most medical doctors in the world are theists? So those who are working on your bodies, those who are caring for your soul, yes, 70, and I have this on another screen here. Let me pull this in here. Should be able to show you this. Yep. So here you have 76% right here. In the survey of U.S. physicians, about 76% said they believed in God. 59% even said they believed in an afterlife. Okay. And about half of them said it actually influenced the way they did medicine. So, they just pick and choose the stats that help them, So we outnumber them in more than the ways they outnumber us, in other words. So notice this. The self, the person inside the body, is an illusion along with all the others. And then now notice how he ends this. This is the last page of his book right here, okay? See? That's the last page. And then it just goes into the backstory. Here it is. If you can't still sleep at night, even after accepting science's answers. And remember, science has no answer. Science doesn't talk. Scientists learn things through the laws that God appointed and the grounding of our ability to discover them through those laws. He has zero explanation for it, Alex Rosenberg, and nor does Carrier, right? So if you can't take the answers of science, which totally contradict his entire worldview, but anyways, then you probably just need one more thing besides this Epicurean detachment that he had talked about before. Take a Prozac or your favorite serotonin reuptake inhibitor and keep taking them until they kick in. So you don't like the answers, that you're not a self, that you're just an illusion, all of these things, well, then just go ahead and take more drugs. Well, how is that working right now as we're teaching people from the goo to the zoo to you that they're not a soul, that they don't have human value? How's that been working with our suicide rates, right? How's that been working around the world today as we see people acting like animals when they're told they're nothing but animals? So let's be honest, it's not working. Nothing good is coming out of this worldview. It is depressing, it is sad, and it is meaningless, and as I like to say, madness.
First part of Michael's argument. Then he gets into the quantum consciousness argument. Before I get to that, though, I want to bring in evidence that was left out. And this is key here. If we want to understand things correctly, we can't leave evidence out. We got to bring it back in. And when we look at all the evidence, then we can decide what is a better explanation for all that. So if we
and see, that was my problem. Remember I said that I think he's going to the minority view of these scientists, and now they're going to try to use that against him, and that's what he's doing.
Take the argument from consciousness generally, like the usual version of this argument. If God does not exist, the only way minds could exist is as the output of a complex physical machine that evolved slowly by natural selection over hundreds of millions of years, from ultra-simple worm brains to fish brains to lizard brains, mammal brains, monkey brains, ape brains, hominid brains, and eventually human brains, which is exactly what we observe. The only way consciousness exists on atheism is as complex evolved computers, and we observe complex evolved computers. And we know this because we can take parts out of the brain or deactivate parts of the brain, and we lose the qualia, we lose the consciousness element that it was controlling. So we know the brain is actually generating consciousness as it comes.
That is not entirely true. There is contradicting evidence to that. Let's go back here to the debate review regarding Carrier saying brains can form consciousness because of correlation. Is this proven yet? Because that's the claim that he's making. And it's not proven yet. So number one, he's wrong. It's not proven yet. And then the next thing is, isn't there evidence where people are missing parts of the brain that generally are responsible for correlation of certain brain states, but they then reroute and continue to have those states? So in other words, have we observed that there are certain parts of the brain that we generally map that show these correlations? So you're expecting memory to be here, personality to be here, math to done, complicated thinking to be done here. So we normally see it like that. But then we'll also see people that have brain damage and certain parts are missing. And he's saying that entirely disappears, which sometimes it does. But there are other times, so I'm just using his standard against him. There are other times when these parts of the brain are missing and those functions are still happening. Yes, there is strong evidence showing that people can lose brain regions normally correlated with specific functions, yet retain those same functions because the brain reroutes. So this gives evidence back to the self being the underlying portion of the person, which he is denying. He's not even a person. He's just a bunch of computations. So who am I arguing with? A calculator?
Computation in some sense. Now, God would have no need of this. He could just install disembodied minds in our body. No delicate, easily damaged, nutrient, oxygen-hogging brain. We wouldn't need that. It would just be a...
He could, but he didn't, and you're not God. So what is your point? You don't even get to make that kind of an argument. God could have done X, Y, and Z. I don't care what you think God could have done. You don't have any right to make an accusation against God because you have no morals, no foundations for judgments, no foundations for any philosophy you're going to employ against God. You are now using God's rules saying, why can't God do such and such? Well, he doesn't have to answer to you, and he can still be God. Your arguments fail. The fact that you don't even have a foundation for your arguments, they fail. And why are we in physical bodies with souls that don't cooperate well and that are in anguish quite a bit is because of the fall. It talks about it in our book in the first 3 chapters.
Soul in control of the body. If I was God, I could do that easily, and there'd be a lot of actually moral reasons why I would prefer that, to make people that way. And certainly God could make it that way. And the key thing here is, if naturalism is true, we could not be made that way. If naturalism is true, the only way we could be made, and therefore if we wake up in a naturalist world, a world without God, obviously we're there, we're conscious. The only way that could be is if we have a complex machine that evolved after millions and millions of years to produce that thing.
If there is no God, you haven't got evolution. You don't even got the first starting point. You only have nothing. From nothing, nothing comes.
That's the only thing that could exist on naturalism, and yet that's exactly what we observe. Whereas on God, on theism, that isn't the
nothing could exist in naturalism. Naturalism is a married bachelor. Naturalism is a square circle.
only way we can observe it.
It's a contradiction. It's impossible to have a creation without a creator. This is madness.
Not even the most likely way that we would exist and observe. We would be disembodied minds. And by the way, if we had that, if we had no brain, we could locate no physical organ whose computations can explain anything we're doing, and yet we're conscious, etc. That would actually be really good evidence for God.
This is a false dilemma. You can have a brain and a soul, which is what we have.
Or at least the supernatural. And so, but we don't have that. We have, surprisingly, exactly what we would expect if there was no God, which means God had to specifically go out of his way to design the world to look exactly like a world without God in it, which now you have to explain why he would make a strange decision like that.
You would have to be a donkey-brained atheist to think you are in a world that could be created without a God. You would have to be a fool. Like the Bible says, the fool says in the heart, there is no God. You would literally have to be denying every possible sense of rationality and logic to come up with what you're coming up with. It is impossible to have a something from a nothing. It is impossible for molecules to go to mind. It is impossible for contingent things to bring about a reality. They would be in an infinite regress. It is impossible to have design and information without a design and an informer. It is impossible to have rationality without being a rationalizer. Everything this man just said in these first few minutes of his opening debate, the debate would be over once I got the mic by God's grace and would hold him to one of these points. One of these points. And I thank God for Michael Jones. I'm not trying to say I'm better. I'm just saying these arguments, and I would love for someone here in this live chat with my 1 or 2 viewers or followers here to come up and try to prove this, not in a formalized debate. I'm done with formalized debates. I would rather shave my head with a cheese grater than to be in more formalized debates. I've done enough of them, okay? I want someone in this chat room, not in their chat room, or rather in this live, to answer my simple questions, starting with the ones from David Hume and Alex Rosenberg. How do you know anything? I want to know how you do know anything. I was just answering real quick. God, your turn. because I wanted, and this is what I was talking about before, this infinite regress. And I just want to show everybody this so you understand that as an argument here, what we're talking about when we say the infinite regress, okay? What we're talking about is you can't keep going back and back and back without having a beginning. All contingent things need a necessary thing. So let me just give you an example. And this is why God can't have a God and like the Mormons believe, okay? So let me just pull out my marker right here. So here he is right now, Richard Carrier, okay? And I love him, and I love him enough to call him the truth. The Bible says an open rebuke is better than hidden love. So here he is with a donkey brain, okay? So he is here with a donkey brain. And he is saying with this donkey brain that everything he knows about the world, and here we'll just put everything he knows about the world as a circle around him, can only exist because of naturalism. Now, what am I asking him? I'm asking him, before you got here, what was here? So you're a contingent thing that now knows all of these things. So now I want to know, where did all those things come from? You weren't the originator of it, were you? So now he says evolution, and we'll just back him all the way up to the Big Bang. So here we go. Now we got the Big Bang, right? Now we got this. We got the Big Bang and everything that's inside of there. Well, my friend, where did that come from? And according, we haven't got here in the debate yet, but according to IP, who already had his quotes up there, which now we have to take serious, and I can't wait to use those in my rage bait shorts to show the madness of atheism, is he now wants to say the Big Bang and the universe can come from nothing. Wow. So he is so smart to show us he can come up with an answer for everything that resulted in him, and that answer is nothing. So what I want to now ask him is, how does this nothing have a something that explodes? How does it have, and I could just, start putting in here, how does it have laws of nature? How does it have rationality? How does it have regularity? We'll just put reg here. How does this universe now have what we would call objects or things in the world, objects? And I'll just run through all of this. I want to know where all of this came from this nothing. And then some people will go, well, it was a Big Bang of a multi-universe, of a multi-universe, of another multi-universe, of another multi-universe. And so my thing is saying, what was the first? Where was the multiverse maker? Like if you've ever watched like Loki and Marvel, they have like a multi-universe. Even the make-believe people of the Marvel universe are smarter than some of the donkey brain doctors that come up and try to sell this nonsense to us. They at least acknowledge there needs to be a multiverse creator. But then what do I ask then? Who made the multiverse creator, right? So it just goes on and on and on and on and on. So we call this the infinite regress. It's insanity to believe this. This is insanity. The same way to believe this about the universe is about anything else. So let's say you want a book and you want to borrow this book from Joe. I'm Joe and I have this book right here, right? And then you tell me, Joe, I want to borrow it. And I say, hey, I lent it to Mike, right? I lent it to Mike. Go get it from Mike. Go get it from Mike. And then you go to Mike, and then Mike says, well, I lent it to Sam. Go get it from Sam. Do you understand an infinite regress? An infinite regress, you would never get the book. You go to see Sam, you go to see Mike, you go see the next one. But if it keeps going back, you never get to this place where there is the book. Do you get my point? This is what he's doing. He's borrowing from nothing. He's pushing it back, pushing it back, pushing it back to a literal nothing. Not the Alex Rosenberg nothing of a quantum vacuum, etc. He's pushing it back to a literal nothing, and he's now telling us that's where you get it. So we're asking him, where do you get it from? And he's saying, oh, I get it from a nothing. Where do we get it from? Boys and girls, class, where do we get it from? God. Everybody say it with me. God, right? We get it from God. And then now if somebody says, well, who created God? They don't understand our definition of God. Our definition of God is the originator of the books, is the originator of the universe, is the originator for all of these laws of regularity, the very dead end that Hume found himself in the problem of induction. You can't do anything in science without a world. You can't do anything in a world unless it's a regular world. You can't do anything in a regular world unless it's governed by laws. You can't do any science in a place that's not a world, that doesn't have laws, that's not regular, and then that you are not an observer. So how do you bounce all the way back to do science? You don't get it from nothing. This is madness. This is madness. This is insanity. This is why nothing, capital N, nothing in our world operates like this. Everything we operate on has the foundation of God. Why are you here? God. Why are there natural laws here? God. Why is time here? God. Why is there space, time, and matter? God. Why is there regularity? God. Why is there design and information, and now we're making AI? God. God is the only answer. And then what I think is hilarious is that the donkey brains want to pit us against the nothing to God. This is not even a close choice. This is literally a zero versus a hero. There is nothing in nothing. And we are presenting God, and then they want to say that's not philosophically sound and bring us into madness. Do not let them do it, my friend. And I just want to show you, because I don't know if he's going to speak about his nothing here in just a moment, but for my sake, I want to show you his quotes that
when my team pitched the idea,
that
I thought it
IPO
was impossible. The pan that
he said, just in case you don't believe me. This is what he said, and he has his quotes. The assertion, ex nihilo nil, from nothing comes nothing, which I've already asserted, is false. This dude thinks he can get something out of nothing because that is a rule, and nothing contains no rules. Nothing doesn't contain anything. There is no rules. There's nothing in nothing. But let's keep going. No such rule can therefore exist when there is nothing. And he's capitalizing it like he's God. He's worshiping nothing. We're worshiping God. And you think we're the crazy ones? You honestly think, and I hope that this inoculates some of you on the fence of being agnostic or an atheist. Do not be a donkey-brained atheist. I hope this inoculates you to this insanity. He is capitalizing in for nothing like it's a God, right? So as to go, let's go. No such rule can therefore exist when there is nothing, so as to govern that nothing. Therefore, it cannot be the case that only nothing comes from nothing. In fact, we cannot establish that it is likely that only nothing will come from nothing. Yes, we can, because nothing is no thing. It has no thing. Oh, Lord, help me. Help me to love the fool in their folly.
Based on it, and it's available free. It's not behind a paywall.
Okay, let's see here.
Neuroanatomy, everything we've learned tells us this. And so it is reducible to those systems. There's no reason to believe that it's not. So that takes care of all of that stuff. And I think, is there anything more I want to go into before I continue? No, I think I'll skip. How much time do I have? 1 minute. Okay, the Izok problem, real quick. We'll get to the lucky God problem later, hopefully in rebuttals.
Hold on here.
Right here.
Skip that.
Really, this is force fields. We see it as presenting this explanation to show that we do have possible explanations that could be true.
Let's go.
Brain responsible for generating these kinds of qualitative experiences.
There we go.
And we know they evolved gradually over time, and we know why they evolved, why they got selected to survive and others didn't. Now, qualia come and go with the parts of the brain that generate each in animals as well as humans. And again, in touch all the way down, I show that qualia appear to be the inevitable outcome of computing models. And so we don't really need God to explain any of this, and therefore we don't get the premise that Michael needs on this. When we get to the quantum consciousness argument, I think a lot of that depends on philosophers like Kastrup and those who want to actually follow that up. I have an article on Bernard Kastrup's idealism, so that's a great breadcrumb for you to start into that adventure. Michael's aware of this, and so that's the place I would go. I'm limited on clock, so I can't go into detail on that. But the basic idea is, if he's starting with the idea that we can't explain what particles are or what waves are or whatever. That's not really inherently a problem in physics because we have lots of theories as to what they are. Just because we don't know which theory is true doesn't mean that we don't have a theory or that we can't explain it. So I'm going to pick
So I'll just make up a bunch of ones and then use, like you said, I'm going to use whatever one fits right now. And this is why I disagreed with Mike a little bit, because he's relying upon the minority view that these particles in physics may not ever be explained because they might be fundamental to the mental world. So in other words, he's showing that a minority view of now physicists are starting to see a psychological similarity in the physical world as they do in the mental world. And that's why IP is an idealist. And I think that's just giving this guy too much room to do some word saladating on these theories, because to me, I don't even care if they find a theory for particle physics, particle physics and then begin to describe these waves and how they function with an observer. I don't even care. I just want to know why there's something rather than nothing. I want to know how you're an observer and all these other things we've already been through.
Explanation. It doesn't mean I think this explanation is necessarily true. I don't think we proved it yet. My only point in presenting this explanation is to show that we do have possible explanations that could be true. There could be.
And by the way, I never let them argue with hypotheticals because I hate hypotheticals. Give me the one you know, and then that way we can crush it in Jesus' name.
Other physical explanations that are true, that turn out to be actually true. So I'm just presenting basically a possibility here to show that we actually have possible ways to explain this. And one is if we do superstring theory fundamentally to spacetime. In other words, all waves, all particles, et cetera, actually reduce to waves in spacetime through manifolds that are at the Planck scale. They're really small. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice here. So if you can look into superstring theory, but if you do superstring theory with waves of spacetime, you can end up explaining all the phenomena of quantum mechanics, and therefore all particles, the whole standard model, and so on. And really, it comes down to how do things change direction or move, essentially. So, for instance, solidity, the table, this thing right here. Really, this is force fields. We see it as a solid object, but it's actually mostly empty space.
My energy bill dropped from $150 to $50 by doing this.
We can explain that.
My friends laughed at me when I spent $40.
Some people.
So we can explain that in physics that way. So we don't actually have this problem that we can't explain particles, we can't explain things. We actually have those things. And a good example is when Michael says that you can reduce things to mathematical formalisms.
It's just so frustrating. Lord, make me patient. So yeah, you can explain it with a donkey-brained way, or you can put some humility into your explanation and actually be honest, like how Michio Kaku is, who specializes in string theory, and listen to what he says.
A symmetry that comes out of physics, not mathematics, and has shocked the world of mathematics. But you see, all this is pure mathematics. And so the final resolution could be that God is a mathematician. And when you read the mind of God, we actually have a candidate for the mind of God. The mind of God, we believe, is cosmic music, the music of strings resonating through 11-dimensional hyperspace. That is the mind.
Oh, so you can actually come to God, and I know this may not be like the God I'm talking about, a personal God. He may be like referring to a deistic God. But do you notice how people who work in this field can 100% see what Mike is saying? And so I'm not here to get into this argument. I don't think there's any need for this argument. I know that Mike from Aspiring Philosophy, he goes into this and shows these people in their own worldview, evidentially, that there's explanations that God can only fill. So basically, he takes them down the road and says, see how God can be the best explanation. I don't tend to like to do that, because then you can have this guy simply pick out one of 10 explanations and say, mine beats yours, and then you're kind of left with a wash. You know, what's the symmetry breaker here? So I just wanted to show you as a listener that Michio Kaku has no problem saying that pure mathematics comes from the mind of God and that he's a musician. Okay, so enjoy that.
It's worth pointing out that all mathematical formalisms describe physical behaviors. So really,
yeah, all mathematical formulas come from where, dude? Just tell me where they come from. I just want you to paint it red right now in that brain scan of yours. Just show me in the consciousness where mathematical formulas are, and then show me out here in the world where all that information is floating around. Show me the waves of mathematical information, my friend. Show me, my guy, in a microscope or any type of telescope, that mathematics that you're relying upon so much to make these highfalutin word salads.
Formalism is just a description of what's happening physically. And that means...
Yeah, and Hume says, you don't know what's happening physically. You could be a poached egg. Just to remind you of your guys who are more honest than you are, who take the philosophy of the skepticism further than you do and are honest with it and don't try to pretend that it doesn't exist. They say you don't know the difference between yourself and a poached egg, and there is no belief that is rational. There is no beliefs that you make that are rational. The only way you could is if you assumed it to begin with, that there is a natural world in an order, that math works, and you're an observer able to interact with it.
That the formalism corresponds to some physical thing. So you can't argue from the fact that a mathematical formula describes a thing that there's no physical thing being described. It actually is a physical thing being described. Force field.
And where did that come from?
This is one of these force fields arising from space-time, warping of space-time at small scales and so on. All of this would work. So there's not really a problem coming up with an explanation.
Yes, he's using a Dorilla pillow. How can you tell? Have you heard about...
Hey, there's not really a problem when you make up stuff. There's not really a problem. I can just make up whatever I want. There's not a problem. And then they call us the fantasy ones, right? Like we believe in a flood and a talking snake, and yet they believe in talking fishes. That's what we once were. They believe that you rain on a rock long enough and chemicals come from it. You can evolve from the goose to the zoo to you to everything here. They believe that nothing actually has properties, literally by the English word, not a thing, right? They believe that you can do science without having any grounding for regularity in the nature of the world and the laws of nature. They just believe you can do all this stuff. You want to talk about wishing upon a star. This guy believes he's Stardust and has the wishes greater than a child going to Disney World hoping to meet Cinderella.
Again, don't have time to go into it in great detail. You can Google this and look into it to find what are the explanations of this. So look for scientists and physicists talking about it, not the sensationalists. Force field, and we can explain that. Oh, I have one, thank you. But thank you so much. So we can explain that in physics that way. So we don't actually have this problem that we can't explain particles, we can't explain things. We actually have those things. And a good example is when Michael says that you can reduce things to mathematical formalisms. It's worth pointing out that all mathematical formalisms describe physical behaviors. So really a formalism is just a description of what's happening physically. And that means that the formalism corresponds to some physical thing. So you can't argue from the fact that a mathematical formula describes a thing that there's no physical thing being described. It actually is a physical thing being described. Force fields is one of these. Force fields arising from space-time, warping of space-time at small scales and so on. All of this would work. So there's not really a problem coming up with an explanation. You give another example of the cosmic web and the mind. This is a thing that, again, don't have time to go into it in great detail. You can Google this and look into it to find what are the explanations of this. So look for scientists and physicists talking about it, not sensationalists. And what you'll find when you do that is that it's actually a thermodynamic effect of systems evolving by deterministic physics into the most efficient geometric structures. So the same kinds of thermodynamic action that builds stellar clusters is also pushing the cells of our brain to organize in a certain way.
Oh, wow. So there's just stuff pushing our brains in a certain kind of way. That's so amazing. Dude, that's so amazing that our brain just pushes things in a certain kind of way. Can we do that right now and just see random things push in a certain way? Can we do, just objects and then just make a building in a random way? Can we go to the beach and just watch the wave, make a sandcastle? I mean, they think, I want you to understand this because, I do my shorts and it's like rage bait. They honestly think that this explains the universe better than the watchmaker example. And then they'll point to things like, well, dude, look at, snowflakes and all of that's my point. Snowflakes and fractals and all of the geometry in the world, those laws are regular and designed. It's not an accident. A snowflake is the way a snowflake is. The world operates on these laws, and you're just taking it for granted, saying, well, I don't see the watchmaker today, so I don't have to believe in him. I'll just use all the laws that it's like the one person said, I'll explain the universe to you, just grant me one miracle. Well, what's that one miracle? The universe existing with natural laws that explain everything. It's like, hey, we'll take it from here, Christian, and now explain everything after you've given me the entire universe, and we will grant you nothing, sir. We will not grant you any of this.
Because that's the most efficient way to do the thing that the brain is doing. And when it comes to the arrangement of galaxies in space, it's the most efficient way for the exchange of energy. So it actually just sort of forms that way naturally.
So it just happens to be designed in the same way because design things just kind of naturally came out to be designed. I get it. And that's from nothing, right? Got it. With a capital N, nothing. Got it.
Very similar to the fractal physics that we find in like the formation of trees.
Yeah. Isn't that something? Who brought up fractals first? I did, right? Because what do you think fractals are, dude? Oh, they're just happy coincidences that look pretty. Jeez. At least give it up for Michio Kaku, who says you're looking at the mind of God the deeper you get. Come on, dude. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God. Prepare to meet thy maker, my friend. Repent of your sins and repent of this folly.
Their branches go and then compared to the way that coastlines look and so on. It's just deterministic physics actually explains it. There's nothing special about it. And it doesn't mean that the universe is a giant brain or anything like that. It couldn't do that because it doesn't have information doesn't travel around it fast enough for it to think. So when we look at all of this, we see consciousness is a process caused by physical processes. The history, all of the physics, all of the neuroanatomy, everything we've learned tells us this. And so
everything, I've already put him up here. Nothing has told you that, my friend. You have not solved the hard problem of consciousness. You have not we just solved it. The mapping of the brain. We just figured it out. It's all just here. We figured it out. It's all there. Correlation proves that the brain causes consciousness is not proven. Carrier stated as if it was a settled fact, but in philosophy of mind and neuroscience, it is not established. The claim rests on an assumption, not a demonstration. Well, great, dude. You're great at preaching to us. You're just preaching a bunch of nonsense.
But it is reducible to those systems. There's no reason to believe that it's not.
The reason to believe that it's not is because it contradicts everything you had just said previously. If you are just matter in motion, there's no right or wrong with matter in motion. When a ball rolls down a hill, does it roll down right or wrong? Does this guy not even understand what he's saying? There's no right or wrong in how chemicals fizz and how neurons shoot. You are now making right or wrong statements and value statements. Your first words out of your mouth in this debate was that you were better at assessing the evidence than Michael Jones. Where does your better scales come from? Where does your value system come from? Where? How do you even know to make judgments about evidence? Lord help me. Peeking the mic here a little bit. Sorry, guys. I'm going to calm back down, back to this nice chill where I was at. Help me, Jesus. He's about done here.
So that takes care of all of that stuff. And I think, is there anything more I want to go into before I continue? No, I think I'll skip. How much time do I have?
Please don't.
1 minute. Okay, the is-ought problem, real quick. We'll get to the lucky God problem later, hopefully, in rebuttals.
Yeah, I hope you solve the is-ought problem, which is basically, this is the way things are, and now he's going to make a moral judgment the way it ought to be. So, it's like, it's good to not, eat your neighbor like a lion does or whatever. That, that's a good thing to do. And we as moral objectivists, that means we don't believe morals are just subjective. We say there has to be an ought to teach us not to do that, right? Otherwise, might makes right. And remember, Alex Rosenberg, he said there is no such thing as morals. I don't know if I got to that point. Yeah, I don't think I did. Let me just show you real quick. And the Atheist Guide to Reality, Alex Rosenberg, I'm sure is probably his buddy as well, because he already mentioned Daniel Dennett, and Daniel Dennett and them all hang out. So let me just show you here in the book, Atheist Guide to Reality. He totally just says there's no morals. There's no moral right and wrong. Let's not even pretend there is, So you could eat your neighbor in this world and it not even matter, right? Because there is no right or wrong. Let's get here. Okay, right here. Is there a soul immortal? Are you kidding? So it's laughable. Oh, it's laughable. Is there free will? Not a chance. So you were determined to write all of this, right? So you were determined to be this way. So what's the point of even doing this? We're all determined. I'm determined to be a Christian. You're determined to be donkey brain, right? What happens when we die? Everything goes on pretty much as before without us. What is the difference between right and wrong, good and bad? There is no moral difference between them. So now let's see if my friend can get across this boundary of the is-ought, or is he just going to settle with no objective morals? Whatever you do or whatever you want to do, it goes. Let's just make sure we get it. Is abortion, euthanasia, suicide, eating your neighbor, paying taxes, foreign aid, I added that in there, right? Or anything else you don't like, forbidden, permissible, or sometimes obligatory. Anything goes. Okay? So Richard Carey, he's so smart. He's so smart. Let's see how smart he is now about solving the moral problems, right? Let's see if he can do that, or if he's going to rely upon donkey brain understandings of things. Let's see here.
So the is-ought problem, that's actually been solved for a while. This is a misunderstanding of what Hume said. We prove oughts from ises all the time. So like if you want
Oh my gosh. He thinks he solved this problem. Let's see how he solved it. Let's see, did he really solve it? Or did he pretend to solve it by either equivocating like they do with nothing, or just simply being ignorant of what the actual problem is? Let's see here. Let's listen.
to build a bridge that will stand up, you ought to act a certain way. So if you're a surgeon who wants to save the patient's life, you ought to sterilize your instruments. So we can easily reduce oughts to ises. And so the question is, what would be a moral reduction? What would be a moral imperative instead of just these utilitarian imperatives? Moral imperatives are the oughts that arise from the things that supersede all other imperatives. So empirically proving imperatives is something that we've done. I have a paper on this about all objective moral facts exist in all possible universes. That was published in Religions. Michael referenced that. I would recommend you check that for the complete starter case on it. And it's available free. It's not behind a paywall. Anyway, so the is-ought problem doesn't create a problem for us because empirically proving oughts in science does that all of the time. I have other arguments to make on that, but I think I'm running.
So I'm going to use more science to now prove morals can compare to how we discover things in science. Does this guy even understand what he's talking about? You can't prove science with science to begin with. You don't even have a basis for your science, first of all. And then you cannot bring over your science into the world of morality because and I know atheists believe this like Alex Rosenberg, so it looks like he might be diverting here a little bit. You might be able to say 2 + 2 = 4 always in our world. A bridge always holds up with the laws of physics in our world like this. Therefore, now I'm going to say you can't eat your neighbor. No, my friend. You can't now go to a metaphysical claim of not eating your neighbor. Not eating your neighbor is not demonstrated like how math is demonstrated or how physics is demonstrated. Someone can easily say back to you by the laws of nature, I'm hungry, my neighbor is meat and he's weak, therefore the fittest will survive. he thinks he answered this. He thinks he has articles to point us to. And I understand a debate, you can't say everything, but it's absolutely foolishness to think that he just solved the is-ought problem. He did none of the sort. He diverted and switched subject. He did a non sequitur, meaning it doesn't even apply. He made a categorical error trying to compare categories of the natural sciences to metaphysical principles, like you don't eat your neighbor. And then I showed you clearly that you can now, according to him, eat your neighbor if you can simply show it in the physical world. And I'm hungry in your food. There we go. We're going to eat our neighbors. And that's why Alex Rosenberg, as I just said before, clearly says anything goes. Let's make sure we finish out these last words.
Time? Is that the... Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much for that opening as well.
Boom. We're done. Thank God. Thank God I'm done with that. Woo! That's why I don't want to do moderated debates anymore, people. I just want to hold them to one of those points. And I think, God, that they had the cross-examination and all of that, I'll just put this up here as I get ready to close out. Any customers want to come on up, let me know. Nobody came up today. Last time I went live, I had a Muslim. That's why I don't want to do moderated debates, because it makes it sound like, oh, IP made some good points and he made good points. And even the chat, being unbiased, as I said at the beginning, gave him an A- and gave IP a B+. And I'll listen to the rest of it to see if I agree, because it's judging unbiased. And then I will even run through my review of this by chat and see how well I did, because I don't know how IP can't knock it out of the park right now. I don't understand. I don't get why he wouldn't have scored massively higher than a Carrier, because that was terrible. There was nothing in that what we have just heard that can be brought to any court of law that would be looking for evidence that he would have won any kind of court case, because you're not deciding upon evidence at the beginning. You're deciding upon what decides evidence. And so the court case wouldn't be on who has the better evidence. And that's where I got to see, did Michael Jones kind of get drawn into an evidential argument with him? That would be the only way I could see him, like I said in my chat review, getting a higher grade. And just reminding people who watch this, I took the transcripts. They were 100 pages. I took them and put them into my chat. I asked it to grade and break down these points right here. And then here it did right here with Carrier. And then I asked who what their grades were. Michael Jones got a B+, Carrier got an A-. And I asked it then to put it side by side, the winner and all that. And I just don't see it. See, like right here, he's thinking that that Carrier won this. I keep saying he, but the chat's thinking that Carrier won because it's reducible to computation, because it can map it. How in the world? And then I asked the chat, I said, have they solved the hard problem of consciousness or the soft problem? And it's like, no. So I don't know if it's just counting the arguments as the way it was presented. I have no idea. But like I told people at the very beginning, I don't care if chat agrees with me or not. I just wanted a non-biased way of looking at it. And then I asked chat to show me the arguments that I would use against Carrier. And I don't know how long he would last with me. He might get upset with me at some point and want to end the conversation, because I wouldn't grant him anything. It would be like him trying to explain math and then me asking him, where does math come from? And all of these things. And so I asked chat to put it here in a table right here. What does it say? Yeah, refute it with my points. So it went through all the points, and I put it in a deductive argument. Let me see. Do I have a table? No. Let's see. Let's do this. Do my arguments against Carriers in a table. And let's see how it would put it out here. Anybody wants to come up, come and get some. See, so I know it's not being unbiased right now, because I already told it my arguments, right? Yeah, so Carrier's claim the brain produces consciousness because brain states correlate with conscious states. And then I would go correlation doesn't give causation, and this right here. And then the core principle would be neuroscience refutation, plasticity. And didn't I just mention plasticity here, right? So plasticity beats his point. Boom. The self can change the brain. Jeffrey Schwartz, you are not your brain. Remember, and I showed you that. I don't want to go over this all again, as sometimes, as I say, preach it all over again. But Jeffrey Schwartz, you are not your brain, and neuroplasticity shows you that you are an observer that can make physical impact into your brain through yourself, right? And it's obvious. That's why we lose weight, because otherwise, think about this, weight loss would be impossible. If you are just your brain, then you would always be hungry and you would be obese. And all addictions would drive you this way. And as one person said, doom scrolling, you would never be able to stop doom scrolling. And so, yeah, I would definitely run that by them. The computational system, yeah, computation has no first-person perspective. These are exactly the same things I've already brought up. Non-rational causes cannot yield justified true beliefs. So then I would ask them, do you have any true beliefs? If you do, where did they come from? Because they can't come from mere computation. The only reason why now AI and computers have true beliefs is because we check them and because we program them. That's the only reason. Naturalism is simpler. Of course not. God is metaphysically simple. And then the necessity argument, boom. And that's with contingent and non-contingent. That's good right there. Naturalism better predicts the brains. Absolutely not. It can explain biological structures, but not consciousness. And here it brings up the hard problem of consciousness. But not only would I bring this up here, but I would also say that it doesn't explain how minds, well, the hard problem, yeah, would still be there. I would say how minds can grasp truth. Not just how do we have a consciousness, but how does it interact with truth? So think about it. Your brain does not hold all the truth of the world, and yet you can learn things every day. How does your brain acquire new information? And then another argument would be, how does your brain keep identity of the self throughout its existence? So there's multiple problems here, not just the hard problem of consciousness. Laws, logic, mathematics, and rational order just exist. Yeah, see, that's an easy one to blow up. They are they are non-material, and that's why we can all grasp them. And that was kind of getting to what I was just talking about. So I put it there as a separate point. The divine conceptual dilemma. The universe could come from nothing. That's easy to crash and burn with, because the something in his nothing allows there to then come a something. So it was never a true nothing. If his nothing can become a something, then it's not a true nothing. There is something in the nothing that he's smuggling in there. Let's just keep going through these. Consciousness evolved from simpler minds, and complexity does not explain subjective. Now, this would be taking evolution as true, which I don't, but I could even borrow that argument. But it doesn't contain, complexity does not contain subjectivity, because you can make a computer as complex as you want, and this doesn't have qualia, and that would go back to the hard problem. But I would also just say, show it. I would put the burden of proof on him. He's making the claim, show that it has done it, show me what consciousness is. So I would go back more to the hard problem again, put the burden of proof on him. Consciousness disappears when the brain shuts down, and then, as I mentioned before, there are documented cases where the brain shuts down in certain parts and it still keeps going. And so near-death experiences, NDA would also be helpful there in the transition model. And that means that the brain can be rewired in other ways. A necessary mind is not required. Brute facts are simpler. And then brute facts cannot ground logic. So if you want it to be like brute facts and a Platonist, then he's no longer just a naturalist. So he has to change his worldview on the spot. And then I could bring up the argument of necessary being, which is that God is the necessary being for all grounding, including logic and so forth. Yeah, so here we go. And let me just say, put it into a good summary for me to read off. There we go. Let's see if I agree with this. Put it into, how about this? 20 words or less. Here we go. 20 words or less. Let's see if I agree with this summary, because remember, I've already have programmed in here my arguments. Carrier's view fails. Correlation isn't causation. Matter can't yield minds. Logic needs a thinker. Only a necessary mind explains everything. Boom, shakalaka. Brain correlation doesn't equal production. Consciousness, logic, and rational order requires a necessary mind, not blind matter. Of course, these are all good. Maybe I'll just keep reading them right here, right? Naturalism can't ground consciousness or logic. Rerouting brains and abstract truth shows only a necessary mind truly explains reality. Brains reroute. Matters can't think. Logic demands a mind. A necessary mind can't. Necessary mind, not naturalism, explains reality. And since I haven't listened to the rest of the debate, let's ask, if Mike would have employed some of these, could he have passed his carriers A-? So Mike got a B plus, Carrier got an A minus. And if he would have used 2 or 3 of his arguments, especially the self-dilemma, yeah, these are the ones that I say, he would have almost certainly pushed Carrier's grade from an A minus down to a B. There you go. So he would have brought him lower, not made him look so good. And I got to go over it now because there's been times where I've had chat give me the summary of a debate, and then I went through it and I was like, that actually did happen, that these things were being said that you think would have made him a winner. So when I listen to the rest of it as I have time, I think I'm pretty sure Mike's going to bring up those things. I wouldn't see why he wouldn't. But hopefully you enjoyed your time with me today. Come to know Jesus, repent of your sins, confess Christ or confess madness. I hope that you confess Christ. Just look for me as I come back around. Share if you care. God bless you. See you next time.